Oh, the purpose of of a delegate is to take action. To take action. They're not there to talk, even though they like to. You'll see them just go on and on and on, and that's not the point. However, more importantly, the purpose of the non-delegate is to advise the delegate how to vote and what motion to propose, how to vote. The delegate doesn't have tyrannical authority over the vote. The delegate has an obligation to you, the non-delegate, and for that matter, any of its constituency. So let's look at some more of the roles. Every college sends one delegate, but in addition, most colleges send 2 to 12 delegates to the GA, rather non-delegates to the GA. This means that more than the largest percentage of the people that are attending are there to support and advise the delegate, but most of them don't because they figure, oh, the delegate has all the power. The delegate is the only voting member of the General Assembly. You will notice that in the bylaws, it says the board of directors is supposed to conduct the business. Well, they're not. They have no power. They have no vote. All they do is lift all the heavy weight and set it up for you, the delegates, who then listen to the non-delegates. The delegates may not discuss with other delegates what's going on outside of the meeting, but the delegates have an obligation to seek your advice as a non-delegate because you're the constituent. And they can do so anytime, anywhere, no limitation. Delegate must speak to the non-delegate and get their advice. Let me tell you about 4 different problems that occur at a convention. Because what we have, even though we call it a GA, it's really a convention of delegates. In all parliamentary procedure, it's called a convention of delegates. So let's look at 4 problematic concepts. The first one is, and this we see this every time we go to a college and try to work with them. An adopted agenda is considered to be, of course, what you need to work with. But they confuse the agenda items for motions. They think an agenda item is the same thing as a main motion. And they're ready to discuss it as soon as the chair reads the agenda item. And this is wrong. You can't do that because that's not a motion. That's just what you warn the public through the Brown Act, what they can expect. Formal main motions must be proposed before any discussion or legal vote is taken. So the chair says the next item on the agenda is, and he'll read the agenda item. And now he has to wait silently until somebody says, I move that. If nobody says, I move that, then that idea dies. And what we see mostly when Tammy and I go to the colleges is that nobody wants to speak. They're all shy. So we tend to lose the power. The student loses the power because they don't speak up. Sometimes you have someone give a report from a committee, for instance, or some sort of report comes back, and then you are allowed to go ahead and have these folks speak about the issue. But no debate can follow. The clarification, the announcement, the description of the result of the committee is presented. But you can't be debating it until after someone makes a motion. This seems very straightforward, but it is very difficult to convince people to do it. Let's go to another problem. Debate protocol. I assure you that if your meetings go on for 2.5 hours, there's probably no more than 30 or 45 minutes of intelligence in there, of productivity, of efficiency. Everything else is wasted. And it's wasted because the chair tries to be a good guy with everyone, and the chair ends up not stopping the violations. You'll notice under my title, Debate Protocol, under the title, I have RONR, which means Robert Rules of Order, newly revised, the 12th edition that came out in August, and it shows the section 43 and the paragraphs. These ideas all come from, that I've given you in citation, all come specifically from the citation specifies directly to a paragraph, not just a big page and then you can't find it. No, it's within a paragraph. So this new edition is very useful. So let's look at all these. Debate protocol. There are at least 20 in the entire book. I selected only 8. Debate protocol means what are the rules of debate, according to Robert? What is our obligation? What do we have to do? Well, this is what's supposed to be complied with. This is not complied with. People do not obey this. And the guilty party here is, I say this, it's your chair, your presiding officer, the president. And you'll see this at the GA during discussions. people go on and on and on and on, and you like to shut them up because you already heard what they said. You don't need to hear it 5 times from them or repeated by somebody else. So they are violating lots of different rules. And it is the fault of the presiding officer because the presiding officer is not conducting the meeting in accordance to Robert's Rules of Order, even though they claim they do. So here are the 8 violations that Tammy and I commonly find, and we try to correct, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult because the chair wants to be a good guy. The chair does not want to insult anyone by telling them to stop. Well, it's a violation. You have to stop them. Okay, here we go. One person speaks at a time. You will notice all these 8 items you learned in kindergarten. What you didn't learn was how to enforce them. The chair doesn't know how to enforce them. Chair needs your help. So, one person speaks at a time. Number 2, a speaker must be recognized as you're speaking. Just because no one is speaking doesn't mean a speaker can jump in. The speaker has to wait to be recognized because when the person is recognized, what the chair is saying is, you, member A, have the right to speak now. Everybody
I
else
like
must
that.
be quiet. Yes, yes.
So, a quick question: when you say the speaker must be recognized before speaking, if someone during General Assembly is speaking on the pro, or they're the author of the resolution, and someone has a question, who who gets to recognize someone to speak? Is it author of the resolution?
Oh, good point. I will be covering this later on in incidental motions, but the answer is the chair, and only the chair. Only the chair. Because you'll see, number 3, comments are directed to the chair. So if someone in the assembly has a question, they can't just ask the speaker. They can't ask the last person who spoke or the author. They have to ask the question of the chair. Chair is not expected to have all the answers, but the chair is controlling to keep debate and speaking opportunities fair. So all comments must be directed to the chair. Everything, everything. You don't speak to anybody else. As a delegate, and as a done delegate, you need to tell the delegate, address yourself to the chair. You will get their chair's attention, and you'll get results. You won't get results if you just talk to somebody else. All comments are confined to the current motion. If you have a motion, and after that someone makes another motion that goes along with it, you cannot speak about the main motions anymore. You have to speak about the subsequent motion. And I'll give you examples later. Anyone who is repetitive, number 5, repetitively saying things over and over or repeating what somebody else says is violating the rules because we're not there to listen to somebody tell us 10 times, drowning out others. Here's a good one, number 6. And this one happens quite often. And you really need to speak up about this. No one has a right to speak a second time unless nobody else is seeking to speak the first time. And at a convention, you'll get the guy who will try to jump and go to the front of the line because he has a rebuttal. No, he has to wait his turn. His turn is after everybody else who is seeking to speak the first time gets to speak. No speaker, number 7, no speaker may verbally attack or intimidate anyone. We see this at the GA all the time. One speaker will tell the other person how dumb he is, or will tell him how badly his facts are and what he's a liar. You'll hear this when we have had GAs in face to face, and this must be stopped immediately. The last one is speech limits must be enforced. There are speech limits to everything. If they're not, then you're letting it open to everyone speak without stopping. They must be enforced. Let me go to the next one. Definition of majority. We see this in every single college we go to. People say 50% plus one is a majority. Well, that's fine in Hollywood, but a mathematician will tell you a majority is anything greater than half. Anything greater than half. The proof of that is let's look at 13. A board of 13. 50% is six and a half. If you add one to the six and a half, now you have seven and a half. So you're saying that 13% is has a majority as 50% plus one would be seven and a half. Well, in order to get seven and a half, you need 8 votes. You're not going to get eight votes because you don't need 8 votes. All you need is 7. Everyone knows 7 is a majority of 13. So this idea of 50% plus one works only on even numbers. It doesn't work on odd numbers. So it causes a lot of problems. Now let me go to the one that you're going to see today and tomorrow, and you may even see it be allowed, and you should be very upset about this one. Abstain is not one of your rights as a delegate. So the non-delegates must tell the delegates not to abstain. The delegate is there to represent your entire college. We really don't care what the delegate thinks or wants to do. His obligation is to tell us what is good for your college. However, some people will say, "Oh, Robert's rule says that you can abstain since the person cannot be compelled to vote, cannot be forced." Well, those people that read that section stop, and they don't read the rest because the right to abstain is proper as long as it does not conflict with another authority that is higher. This is the main difference that I'm going to point out. And in your case, you have bylaws, constitution, you have lots of other rules that are higher than Robert's rules. Robert's rules is subordinate to the bylaws. Whatever is in the bylaws can contradict Robert. And in the bylaws, we have a very good reason to contradict Robert about abstain. So let me go to the when you cannot abstain. Roberts yields to the association's documents of governance, namely the bylaws, the constitution, anything you've got. However, if you will look in the bylaws of the SSCCC, Article 3, Delegate Assembly, it clearly tells you and uses the following language in a long section. And here's what it says: the SSCCC and the Delegate Assembly, or the official voice of the California Community College students. Now, you tell me how you can be the official voice by abstaining. That's official silence. Another thing, the SSCCC, the board of directors, all the board of directors, I'm sorry they're not here, but the board of directors, as well as the delegate assembly, has the obligation to facilitate the students' involvement in the state system. Involvement, how can the student be facilitated? How can the involvement of the student be facilitated if the person who has to vote is silent? Here's another section, stay it's the same place. The obligation of the board of directors, and the delegate assembly is to engage, to empower, to enrich the students. I challenge anyone in the board of directors or any delegate to show me how they're going to engage, empower, and enrich the student by being silent, by silencing the student, by abstaining. Also, it is the obligation of the board of directors and delegate assembly to adopt several major documents. For the delegates, of course, a resolution. So voting is a fiduciary duty of the delegate. It's a duty of the delegate. It's not an option. Abstaining from voting is irresponsible, dishonest, and shameless because you're supposed to do your work, your job, and you don't. If you don't want to vote in the board of directors, if you don't want to vote as a delegate, then resign. Let somebody else do it because they do want to do it. Are there any comments on that part? Because I'm going to go to the motions that affect you.
Lorenzo, someone has a question or a comment.
Yeah,
Would you like that in the chat or would you like them just to interrupt you?
I like them to interrupt. I like them to interrupt. Let me go to the next item, next section. I have four sections that I mentioned: problems, motions, incidentals, and some more. I'm going to go to the second one now. You will notice on my page, is my slide, the top has a number. In this case, it's 11. Well, it's 11 out of 14. Imagine there are 14 rules, and number 14 is the most powerful one. Then there's 13, 12, 11, 10, all the way down to main motion, which is 1. Okay? This is a ranking of the motions in Robert's Rules of Order. I will only cover those that relate to you as a non-delegate so that you can tell the delegate what to do. Because the delegate is going to be too shy to do it. You're going to need to help them. Your non-delegate needs to help. So, recess. It's recognized. A person has to be recognized, but cannot interrupt. Has to make the motion by saying, "I move to take 5 minutes recess," or "I move to recess until tomorrow's meeting." See, you don't adjourn in a convention that lasts several days. You don't adjourn between days. You recess because the whole thing is only one session. It needs a second. There's no debate. You can only amend the number of minutes. It's straightforward. Everyone is comfortable with that. But you need to, as a non-delegate, you need to help the delegate. Number 10, going down the hierarchy ladder, raise a question of privilege. You'll need this one not only when it's face to face, because that was very obvious, very prominent, But even now in electronic version, it can interrupt anyone who's speaking. You make a demand. It's not a motion. It's a demand. It's not a motion. It doesn't need anyone's second. There's no debate. There's no amend. There's no vote. That's why it's called a demand, because you don't need anyone to help you with this or fight you with this. So the purpose is to seek correction of discomfort to the assembly. For instance, the temperature is too hot or too cold. It's too noisy in the room or in the chat because of the chat. There's too much glare. The handouts are not available. The projection of the slide is too tiny, or it's so lighted out, washed out, you can't read it. Or the voting device you're using is not functioning. These are referred to as assembly discomforts, question of privilege. But it's a question of privilege of the assembly. People will say, personal privilege, my device is not working, or I am cold. No, personal privilege means the minutes have me wrong. I did not vote this way, or it says I'm absent, I wasn't. That's a personal privilege because it affects you and nobody else. All the privilege you will always hear at the GA will be just a question of privilege of the assembly. So if someone says personal privilege, you know they don't know what they're talking about. So you usually just stand up, interrupt, and say, "I rise to a question of privilege." And in this case, with being online, you have to have unmute yourself and have the right to speak out. If you're not allowed to do that, then there is a problem with your rights being denied. Number 9, call for the orders of the day. This one says, let's get back to the agenda. That's all it says. Let's get back to the agenda. Sometimes the chair will skip an item, or sometimes the that item is intended to last 5 minutes and it's already 7 minutes. We need to go back to the agenda. That's why you adopt an agenda, so you can make sure that you get through business. You can interrupt anyone. This is one of those demands. Demands. There's no second, no debate, no motion, no vote. Rather, because it's not really a motion, it's a demand. Someone sits up and yells, "Call for the order of the day." The chair has to stop everything and take care of it. It is only saying let's get back to the agenda. However, the delegates, with your help, can nullify this, getting back to the agenda, this violation, by saying, I move to set aside the orders of the day. Two-thirds vote does it. Or I move to extend debate by 5 minutes. Two-thirds allows it. Or I move to suspend the rules that prohibit us from continuing. Again, two-thirds. So it's a demand, but it can be set aside by two-thirds. If your delegate, if you help the delegate, because they're not here right now, if you help the delegate, they'll be able to do the right thing. If not, they're just going to sit there and let another college walk all over them and take control of the debate, and your college loses. Number 8, going down from 14 to 1, not covering all of them, of course. Lay on the table. This is the one that you have never heard correctly. Everyone thinks lay on the table means to kill something. No, it does not. It means we need to interrupt what's going on. We have a short and urgent, and unplanned as well, interruption for what's going on. And we need to interrupt the process. So we say, I move to lay the main motion on the table. It cannot interrupt anyone, so you've got to wait to be recognized. You have to make a motion. It has to be seconded. There's no debate or amend, and it takes a majority vote. This usually happens, for instance, in our meetings, electronic meeting. Something could be going on, and someone could say, I move to lay the motion on the table, and then there's something that's going to be taken care of because there's an interruption that is going to happen, and you need to take care of the interruption. Okay. Going down. 7, this is the one that I need for you. It's just imperative. It is just the most helpful you can be to the delegate as a non-delegate is to tell them to call the previous question. Keep in mind, a motion is a question.
Benjamin,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Vince, you have a question. Go ahead.
Vince.
Yes, thank you. Going back to lay on the table,
Sure.
I understand that there's a difference between lay on the table and postpone. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. Though I think the next one that's coming up right after what I'm doing here, I think it's number 4. It's going to be postponed. So right now, let's just remember, lay on the table is for a short interruption, okay? And I'm going to get to postpone because I have lots of examples to cover that, okay? So don't let me forget, Vince. I'm coming right along. It's coming in a second, in a few seconds. So I'll continue with the previous question. A motion is a question. That's why you are asked, are you for? Yes. Or are you against it? No. So it is a question. So when Robert makes reference to a question, Robert is always saying a motion. Call the previous question says, bring it up for a vote. It says, stop this babbling and debating and go straight to the vote. You cannot interrupt anyone. You have to make the motion. It has to be seconded. There's no debate, no amend. And because it takes rights away from people, it requires a two-thirds vote. And you say, I move the previous question. Or if there's several motions pending, you say, I move the previous questions on all the pending motions. So you as a non-delegate must help the delegate and encourage this delegate to go up to the microphone and move the previous question. Do not put up, do not tolerate all this babbling. You know, people just want to showcase their voice. Okay, then the next one is to limit or to extend the limits of debate. It's identical to previous questions. Everything is the same, except in this case, all you want to do is allow less minutes or more minutes, allow less speakers or more speakers, or terminate the debate at a certain time. And so you say, I move to extend debate by 5 minutes, or I move to limit debate to 3 speakers per side. Again, if you help the delegate, business will get done. If not, you're going to sit there until very late and you're going to hate the fact that you're in a meeting. Ta-da! Here comes postpone. This is a regular motion. You cannot interrupt. It's a motion you have to make. It can be second. It has to be seconded. It can be debated for the merits of why should we postpone. It can be amended. You know, there's amended to when you can amend that, and it takes a majority vote. When you lay an emotion, lay a motion on the table, it's intended to be there for a few minutes. As a matter of fact, you don't even add the word or the number of minutes. When you lay on the table, you never add the quantity of time. It is illegal. Lay does not take a variable for time. Postpone always, 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 always takes a variable for time. And that's a big difference in how you say it. But postpone, what it is really doing is it is procrastinating the entire main motion. It's just grabbing it and dumping it in some other time. Lay on the table is just saying, oh, hold on. We're going to set you on top of this table while we take care of the interruption, and we're going to bring you right back in a few minutes. You will always see lay on the table used incorrectly, and it'll show you how little people know, and yet they're the ones who are the most vocal. Postpone, on the other hand, says, we don't have enough resource, enough people, enough time, enough whatever. It could even be most of my buddies that are going to vote are not here. I don't want people voting on the motion. I want to move it to another time when I can get my friends to come into the meeting hall. So if you say nothing, you say, I move to postpone the motion. That means until the next meeting. Well, you're not going to be able to do that because there is no next meeting. The 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 GA ends at the end of Sunday, and that's it. Whatever got done, got done. Whatever didn't get done, you'll never see again unless it comes back fresh next year. So there is no other meeting. There's only the 2 or 3 days that you're together today.
Lorenzo,
Yes, please.
so can you give us an example of the short interruption you're talking about that we
Oh,
can use
okay.
lay on the
Yeah,
table for?
yeah. This may not happen at the GA, especially not online. But if we were at the GA face to face, suddenly a policeman or a fireman walks in and scares everyone because he's fully dressed. He's got the hat and the axe, the whole thing. He's walking in. Immediately, the chair will say, or one of the members will say, I move to lay the question on the table, the motion on the table. Obviously, the fireman wouldn't come in unless he has an announcement to make that cannot wait. It is urgent. It is short. It was unplanned. So then the chair would ask the fireman, may we help you? Or what is the matter? And the fireman will just say, don't forget to donate money to the fund, the fireman's fund, and then he leaves. Well, we thought it was an emergency, but an urgency. So that's the sort of thing that happens. In your ASOs, what could happen is that the president of your college steps into your meeting. Well, clearly the president of the college is not loitering around in the halls. The president of the college is going to step in the Senate meeting or CAVE or ICC, and someone will say, "I move to lay the question on the table," and then we listen to the president of the college who gives us an announcement, leaves, and then we take the motion right back and continue. So that's an example. However, postpone says, never mind, we're not going to continue until the procrastinated time. If you say, I move to postpone the motion, if today is Friday, you can postpone it till Saturday. If it was Saturday, you can postpone it to Sunday. It's within the main session. Or you could say, I move to postpone the motion until right now it's 1:30, and let's say we had a motion now, you could say 3:30. Or you could say, I move to postpone the motion until after a specific event. For instance, after recess, after lunch, after finance report is heard. Until beyond something on the agenda. So you postponed it and you procrastinate it, you grab it and you plug it in. You have to plug it in somewhere and it's going to come up in the agenda. Late is not plugged in anywhere because it's just levitating there. It's just levitating in front of everyone. And then you grab it out of the air and bring it right back. Any comments on the difference between lay and postpone?
Vince, did that answer your question?
Yes, yes, but I'm still kind of iffy because you said postpone is to move to a certain time, and what's for lay on the table again?
There is no time set because it's not intended to be set for a particular time. Lay just says, hold on to this. It's like telling someone, here, hold my beer. I'm going to go do this. So the guy sits there holding your beer and then he comes back. So, no, it's just you're holding on to something. And then when the urgency is done with, you take it right back. It's an immediate, it's just an interruption. Think of lay as an interruption. Think of postpone as procrastinate.
So because
Yes,
like I feel like sorry, I feel like
yes, yes.
lay on the table, like lay on the table seems more similar to suspending the rules, because suspending the rules is to move from one agenda item to another if it's urgent, so it sounds kind of like that.
Well, Vince, you're right. They both share a lot. The difference is lay on the table does not alter the agenda. It interrupts it. Suspense alters the agenda. It's very different. But the effect could be the same, except you don't lay something on the table to take something up. If you do that, then you need suspend motion. Lay is only it's an interruption. We're going to come right back to this guy. To this one motion. We're going to come right back. Okay.
We have another hand up.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I think I understand this way. For example, now that we have meetings on Zoom, laying the table can be one of the members lost the internet and disappear for a moment. We can say, lay on the table, we miss one of the members. Could be that.
You're right. You could say we'll lay it on the table so we can help this person, and so he can come back and say, for instance, it could be the main speaker, or it could be the president. Uh, But in reality, you shouldn't have to wait on anyone. But if you wanted to, yes, you're right. Lay on the table would be that. Notice the agenda item, the motion, is not moved. It sits there and waits until you get back to it. That's lay on the table. Postpone.
And then
Yes, yes, yes.
sorry, and the postpone can be like, for example, we had a case that we need to talk with somebody when we are making a discussion and we get an idea and it says, oh, it would be good to have the comment of this person. We can postpone until we can talk with that person and then bring that to the next meeting.
You are right. That you're right. You don't have a
Okay.
resource. You don't have something that's missing. You don't want to continue handling the motion, so you move it to another time, and then it comes back. Thank you, Luis Angela. I'm going to go to the
Okay.
next one. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
The next one is refer. Of all motions, this is perhaps the most difficult one, only because it is awkward. It's got a lot of moving parts. It takes a lot of effort on your part to get everything done. You need the secretary, you need the chair, you need the person who's making the motion, and then everyone has to talk about this and figure out the five moving parts. It is unfortunate that at the SSCCC, the bylaws does not use the word special committee or standing committee. Instead, they call them internal for the standing and external for the special. This is unfortunate because you will never see this in 90 to 95% of the other places you're going to go to where you're going to need to know, you will need to be able to defend yourself and understand what's going on in a meeting. It is unfortunate that people will change the wording and now you're trying to think of something else instead of thinking the way Robert has it praised or labeled. And anytime you do that, you're weakening your own ability to be able to function and fight and defend yourself in another environment. So if it were up to me, I would have the bylaws changed and no longer internal, but rather standing, no external, but special, so that everyone knows what you mean. Okay, this is a regular motion. You cannot interrupt. It is a regular motion. It has to be seconded. There is debate. We need to figure out why should we send it to a committee? Why? It can be amended because it's got 5 moving parts. You can amend all 5, and it takes a majority vote. It allows you to send a motion to a smaller group of people and let them deliberate and come back with a recommendation. So you would say, I move to refer the main motion to a special committee. Now I'm going to show you what the 5 parts are. I moved to refer the motion to a special committee. And now we say, of 3. That's one of the parts that you need. How many people? And then you have to name them. Jane, Jan, Jean. So those are the names. And now you have to say, who is the chair? And Jane as the chair, as you can see in my slide. So far, I've given you 3 of the 5 body parts that you need to include. After that, you need to say also, the committee must report recommendations. You tell it what is it supposed to report to you being the board. And then you tell it when to report. That's number 5. You tell them it's the next meeting. Of all the motions, you can move things into the future, but never beyond the next meeting. You cannot postpone something beyond the next meeting. But refer is the only one that allows you to go beyond the next meeting. So let me give you another little example of this. Notice the difference. All 5 parts are the same if it's a standing committee or internal, as it's called in SSCCC, or whether it's special committee or external, as it's called in SSCCC. The colleges don't call them internal and external. It's only the board of directors at SSCCC. So here are the 5 questions. How many members? What are their names? Who shall be the chair? What will be the assigned task? When will the committee report? Well, in the standing committee, you already know how many people are in it. You already know who they are, and you know who the chair is. So you don't have to answer those questions. If you refer something to the standing committee, let's say the finance committee, you say, I move to refer to the finance committee, and then all you add is give us recommendations, that's this task, assigned task, and report at the next meeting. That's all you need to say if it's going to a standing committee. And you have 10 different standing committees at the SSCCC. In your own ASO, the committees are going to be different. But in the SSCCC, they are the audit, the communications, the conference, the executive, the equitable practices, the finance, the legislative affairs, the regional affairs, the region finance and fundraising, and the rules and resolutions. The names you have for yours are going to be different. So you need to find out in my bylaws, your bylaws, and your ASO, what are the standing committees? That way, if I refer something to a standing committee, it's got to be one of those. And all I have to say is what is the task and who must report. When must they report? Now, let's look at the really difficult part. This is special committees. Special committee doesn't exist. There's nothing there. You're creating it from nothing. So you have to answer all 5 questions, just like I did earlier back here. Notice what I did here. Right at the bottom of my screen, where it says state, it says I move to refer the main motion to a special committee. And then I listed how many members? 3. What were their names? Jane, Jan, Jean. Who is the chair? Jane. And then I also listed what is the task? To report recommendations. When are they going to report? At the next meeting. Those are the 5 questions you need to answer. It's very easy for a standing committee because you only answer 2 questions. But for a special committee, you need a pencil and paper to do this. So let's say a member in your ASO says, I move to refer this motion to a committee, or you're helping also as a non-delegate, helping the delegate. And so there you tell him or her what members to include, how many will they be, who the chair will be, what the assigned task is, and when must they report. All 5 things have got to be included. Don't worry, the chair, if knowledgeable, will not allow the motion to be completed unless the 5 parts are included. Sterling, you had a comment, please.
Yeah. So, could you talk a little bit about the difference between the standing committee and
Oh
special
yeah, yeah,
committee?
yeah. Oh yeah, I messed up on that. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. A standing committee, or internal, as the SSCCC calls it, is listed in the bylaws. That's why I was able to list all 10 of them, because I looked in the bylaws and they're listed there. You look in your own bylaws, and it will list different ones. Whatever is not listed, it's a special committee. You will also hear people refer to a special committee as ad hoc, or a workforce, or a task force. They get all sorts of strange names. The fact remains, if you're dealing with Robert's Rules of Order, if you're dealing like everybody else does in all the 80% of the different associations and agencies in this country, they're dealing with Robert's Rules of Order. They call them standing committee and special committee. Special, of course, because it's only going to last as long as the task lasts. As soon as the special committee reports, it disbands. That's the end of it. But a standing committee is sitting there all the time. Finance committee, it just sits there year long. If something comes up with finance, it's sent to them. If something it relates to from finance, it'll come from them. So they have this little fiefdom that nobody else can deal with finance except the finance standing committee. But special committee, you can do anything you want. Okay, thank you, Sterling.
Lorenzo,
Yes, please.
what if you do not have all the information, all 5 parts? What's the
Okay,
bare minimum you need, and then what can you do to get the rest of those
okay,
parts?
okay. First of all, if you don't have the information or you're not sure what information is needed, you can ask the chair. What else do I need to do to complete this motion? You can always do that. Anytime you're in any meeting, ASO, board of directors, delegates, you can always ask the presiding officer, what else do I need to do to complete this motion? What else do I need to do to accomplish what I really want to do, which is the following? And the chair has to work you through it, help you through it, walk you through it, so you get that information. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you could always say, and this is a sneaky part, it's lazy part, but you can say, I move to refer this motion to a committee created by the president. Dump it all on him or her. Let her do everything. Of course, they have to come back and get approval before they start working. Was that what you meant, Tammy?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to go to the incidental convention motions now. The first part was with all the rank motions. These are referred to as incidental, which means they're mostly mechanics. They only work to help you get the motion adopted or defeated if you hate it. So it's just mechanics. Earlier, somebody asked about requests for information. Okay, these are not ranked, okay? Incidental motions are not ranked, and I'm going to cover only 5 of them because those are the five that you, as a non-delegate, need to help the delegate. There's only 5 of these that I'm going to cover. There's a whole bunch, there are about 30 or 40, but they don't relate to your role. The first one is request for information, which is very appropriate also for at the ASO level. In either environment, if you're in the middle of debate and you hear a contradiction, or you hear someone claim something, or you hear a fact that you're not sure, you don't just interrupt and offer a rebuttal and tell that person, you're lying. That's not true. You can't do that. You cannot do that. That's called attacking the speaker. He may deserve it, but you can't do that. It's unfortunate. Robert doesn't let us do things that we need sometimes in order to keep these problem people from giving us difficulties. So instead, what you do is you interrupt. Notice you can interrupt, and then you ask a question. It's got to be a question. You can't say, "Oh, he's wrong. I have better information." That's a debate. You cannot interrupt for debate. You have to be recognized for debate. But you can interrupt for a question. There's no debate, no amend, no vote, because you're dealing with the presiding officer, the chair. You stand up and you say, uh, "Request for information. Request for information." And the chair recognizes you, and then you say, "Do we have enough money in the bank?" Because the speaker may have said, "We don't have any money," or someone makes a comment about delegates, and if you doubt the information, you ask the chair, "How many delegates may we send to this convention?" Or, "Do the delegates have a right to do the following?" You ask something that the idea is you should ask a question if, without an answer, you feel you will not be able to vote wisely. I'll say that again. You must ask a question if, as a delegate, your delegate is unable to decide how to vote wisely because he needs more information or certain information. So you ask you need to help the encourage your delegate to request for information. Get up and say something. Okay, here's another one, and this is the most important one perhaps because too often people there are violations going on and people figure that this is just a rotten deal. There's nothing I can do. I have to put up with it. No, that's not true. We have rules. Everything in Roberts is based on rules because rules protect rights. If you don't help us enforce the rules, you are allowing someone to violate or deny somebody else's rights, especially yours. So when you see a violation, any violation, it doesn't have to be anything of any importance, just any violation. Of course, it should be something that you're willing to interrupt in order to correct it. Okay? It's got to be something that you figure this is important enough for me to interrupt. So, any violation, you put a stop to the violation. You demand that the violation be stopped and it be corrected. You can interrupt. This is more like a demand. It is a demand. No second, no debate, no amend, no vote. Notice how powerful that is. Anytime Robert gives you a motion that is really a demand, you don't need anybody's thinking second. You don't allow anyone to speak against you. You don't allow anybody to change what you said, and you don't need their vote. That's why it's called a demand. And you can interrupt. Notice that you can interrupt. So if something happens that you believe is a violation, you just yell out, point of order. You got to go to the microphone, and, of course, and yell it out as a delegate. But you need to encourage your delegate if something is violated, some rule is violated, you need to encourage this delegate to do his job, her job, and go up to the microphone. Delegates were not asked to show up so that they can quietly, peacefully back and just vote. No, they've got to participate. They've got to discuss. They've got to assure that no violations are occurring. We cannot have a meeting with violations. So here's the dialogue. A member says, point of order. The chair has to stop everything. Stop everything. Stop the debate. Everything stops. Everything is frozen. Now the chair asks you directly. If you were the delegate, asks you, what is your point of order? Has to inquire. And then the member says, whatever. And of course, you will help the delegate. As a non-delegate, you will help them by telling them what is the problem. Let's say the member says the vote for approval is a majority vote, not a two-thirds. And now here comes the important part. The chair responds to your point of order. The chair has to give you a ruling on the point of order. And the ruling on the point of order is the chair says, your point is well taken, meaning, you're right. Let me stop that right now. Thank you so much for pointing it out. That's what your point of order is well taken. But the chair could also say, your point of order is not well taken, meaning, I don't agree with you. You're wrong. Please sit down and stop interrupting. The chair may do that. They'll say, your point is well taken or your point is not well taken. But you have to get a ruling every time there's a point of order. There's got to be a ruling. The chair has the obligation of stopping everything and giving a ruling. Otherwise, the chair is neglecting his role. Okay, that's the first part. Here comes the next part. What if you don't agree with the ruling? You told the chair there was a violation. The chair says, no, there's no violation. Or somebody else says, point of order, and they claim a ruling and the chair agrees with them. And you don't agree with what the chair said. You don't agree with the ruling. Your recourse is the following. You appeal. Anytime there is a ruling you don't agree with the chair, you appeal. You don't appeal if the chair says today is Wednesday and today is really Friday. That's not a ruling. That's just a memory loss. So you appeal. Again, you can interrupt, but in this time, you need a second. It can be debated, and actually, that's what I want to tell you about the debate, because that's a critical part. There's no amending, because it's either a yes or a no response. But there is a vote, majority vote. Whereas point of order, nothing is required except for you to interrupt someone. An appeal, on the other hand, is just like a regular motion, except you can appeal, you can interrupt with an appeal, and you cannot interrupt with a regular motion. But everything else is the same. You make a motion, you second it, you can debate it, you can. Oh, there's no amending because there's nothing to amend, and then you need a majority vote. Okay, so the first part in the previous screen, before I get into this one, In this one, a member said point of order. The chair said, inquired, what is your point of order? The member mentioned what he thought was a violation. He doesn't have to cite the rule. He just has to paraphrase it. And then the chair uh, renders his ruling. Point is well taken, point is not well taken. Okay? The chair figures, okay, I took care of that point of order, and turns back to the speaker and tries to continue with the speech that the person was giving, the debating, and somebody else, anybody, not just the person who made the point of order. Anybody can stand up, interrupt, make the motion, seek a second, and then say, appeal from the decision of the chair, or just say, I appeal, Mr. Chair. Anything that has the word appeal in there, especially if it refers to decision by the chair. And now here comes the dialogue, the bottom part of my screen. The member says, I appeal from the decision of the chair. I'm paraphrasing this dialogue from the very last 3 lines. And now the chair explains his ruling. Chair has to explain why he thinks he's right. Then every voting member gets to debate once, and only if they want to. Every voting member gets to be recognized once, not twice, just once. However, the chair comes back on the microphone and explains his ruling a second time. He is the only one, she is the only one that can speak twice. Now a vote is taken on whether to agree with the chair or not. Not whether it was 2/3, not whether it's a majority, not whether it's fair, not whether it's pretty. You decide, was the chair correct in the way his ruling was mentioned? Are you sustaining the chair? Not the accuracy of the ruling, but the chair. If the answer is, and it takes a majority vote, the answer is yes, then we go on because everyone agrees with the chair. If the motion is no, the vote is no, then the chair loses and the point of order has to be correct. Any comments? This is probably the one motion that you need to help your delegate the most with because they're going to be too shy to do it. And you need to know what are the parts that are missing so that we get it done correctly. If there are no comments, I'm going to go to the next one.
What would the vote? Would it be majority or 2/3?
It's just a majority. For an appeal, it's just a majority. But the difficult part about the vote is what is it we're voting on? This is very confusing to people. So let's say the point was it's a majority versus a 2/3, and that's the violation. The chair made a wrong decision on that. The chair allowed a motion to be adopted with a majority, and it was supposed to be 2/3, or the chair forced the motion to be failed because he said it takes 2/3, but it had a majority and it was sufficient. So there's a problem with the chair's calling of what the rule is. And someone said point of order, and now we're going to debate it after it's appealed. And so we debate, and the issue here is, and we got to keep this straight, and the chair has the obligation of explaining. If not, request for information, please explain. So the chair has to tell you, you're voting on whether my ruling should be sustained, not whether it's 2/3 or whether it's majority or whether I'm right or I'm wrong or the speaker is right or wrong. No, it's just listen to my ruling. Do you agree with whatever my ruling was? If I'm wrong and you agree with me, we will all be wrong. It's okay. An appeal and a point of order is not there to prove accuracy. Unfortunately, it's more like a popularity contest. Who do you love? You love the chair, you sustain the chair. You love the person who set the point of order, you sustain them. Yet this is an awkward one, but it is very powerful. But it's going to take the non-delegates to explain this to the delegate because the delegate might be confused with everything that's going on and may not be sure. So I'm going to go on. Okay? Okay. Here's another one that is needed for the for a for the GA, because as you know, you have a rule that says you cannot amend. You cannot amend the resolution unless you suspend the rule to amend, which is in the standing rules of the convention that you will adopt that you adopted early this morning. Unless you come back and suspend that rule that prohibits the amending, then the resolution has to be covered as is without any amending. However, the fortunate part is that this question, this resolution, this motion, is really a single topic with several parts. Any part that can be standalone can be considered separately. This is the difficult part for people to remember. Just because it's a resolution, that doesn't mean you have to accept all the resolves. Let's say we have a resolution with 3 resolves. I'll call them Resolve A, Resolve B, and Resolve C. If no one says anything, the motion is going to be discussed and voted upon, this resolution, with all 3 lumped together as one package, because they're supposed to be a single topic. However, if any of these, if Resolve A can stand alone, or Resolve B can stand alone, or whatever, you could make the motion to divide the question. You cannot interrupt anyone. You have to make a motion, second it. There's no debate. There's no that you can amend it, because I'm going to tell you how you can amend it, and it takes a majority vote. So what you're saying is, I know we cannot amend anything, and then we know it's got 3 parts. What if we take each part separately? That way, we adopt the first one, we adopt the second one, and we defeat the third one. What we have just done is we amended and we struck out the third one, but not by amending. We struck out the third one by dividing the question into 3 separate motions. This is very powerful, but you don't have to take them separately. You could amend it and say, I move to divide the question so that we take A and B first, consider it separately from C. Or you could have said that I move that we take each one separately, A separate from B, separate from C. Consider each one separately, debate it separately, and vote on it separately. It takes a majority vote to adopt this. This is a powerful motion. And in all the GAs that Tammy and I have worked, this has always been the solution to when someone has a resolution. Let's say, for instance, you are the author of the resolution, and it's not doing well because you had 4 resolves, and everyone hates resolve number 4. So what you do is you move to divide the question so that you discuss and vote on the first, second, and third part separately and independently from the last one. That way, people will adopt your first 3 because they don't hate the 3, and you're willing to sacrifice the 4th one because you know they hate them. But the important thing is try to get as many adopted. So you do that to save the largest portion of your resolution. Or it doesn't have to be your resolution, it's just a resolution that you love and you really want it to survive. Any comments on this? This is something you as a non-delegate are going to have to walk the delegate through because they probably are not going to remember all of this, and you will because you're not going to be as nervous as they are. Any comments, please? Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. Suspend the rules. Suspend the rules says, let us legally violate a rule. Legally violate a rule. That's what suspend says. If you have an agenda and you have item 7, 8, and 9, but you're working on, you just finished 7, 8 is coming up, you could say, I move to suspend the rules and take up item 9, which means you're skipping 8. And you can do
Lorenzo,
that. Yes, please go ahead.
since we're at a convention, would this also apply to the convention rules that were adopted earlier today?
That's what my next slide is going to show. My next slide will show that. So don't go away, because that's a very important question. So you cannot interrupt someone. You have to be recognized. You need to make a motion. It needs to be seconded. There's no debate, no amend. But the vote varies. The vote is not majority or 2/3 all the time. It depends. And I'm going to tell you what it depends on. But keep in mind, you can only suspend something, set it aside, during a meeting. It's only during one meeting. If you're back at your ASO and you want to suspend a rule that you have, and it's outside of the meeting or it's the next meeting, no, you can't. What you are doing is amending your document. That's different. It takes different voting requirements. So the suspend can only happen during for something that is occurring and is enforced during a meeting. Don't let anybody do otherwise because they are abusing their obligation to actually amend, which takes a lot more voting threshold. Also, you suspend only for that one particular occasion. You don't say, for all the times that I want to amend, from now on, I want to be able to suspend it and amend it. No, you have to do it one at a time. Again, if you do it for more than one, what you have done is amended your rules without going through the amending process or the high threshold of voting. Okay, during one meeting, particular instance. And let me give you two examples, and in a minute I'll show you more. You could say, I move to suspend the rules that prohibit a speaker from speaking more than 2 minutes. This is something that's in Robert's Rules of Order. So it's going to take two-thirds vote. However, what if it's not in Robert's Rules of Order? It's the next one. I move to suspend the rules that prohibit the delegates from eating in the meeting room. That's not in Roberts. That's probably just a standing rule related to the convention. That only takes a majority vote. So you have to figure out, what is it I'm trying to suspend, in order to figure out, and this is what I'm going to show you, in order to figure out, do I have the power to suspend it, or do I not have power? And if I do have power to suspend it, what is the vote? What is the vote required? Let's look at my chart. The Brown Act can never be suspended, period. It's a state law, forget it. The SSCCC Constitution cannot be suspended, forget it. You cannot suspend it. The SSCCC bylaws cannot be suspended. Again, don't let anybody say, oh, I'll move to suspend the bylaws and do this. No, they're showing that you don't know any better, and they're abusing your lack of information. Now let's go to the part where you can suspend something. Robert's Rules of Order. Any rule in Roberts can be suspended. There's a little section called the Fundamental Principle of Parliamentary Law. It's a very small section and includes things you should not suspend. But otherwise, Robert's Rules of Order can be suspended. It takes two-thirds vote. Here's where the problem occurs. The standing rules for the convention. I know you have only one document, but in it, it is composed of procedural as well as ordinary rules. A procedural is one that looks and smells and tastes just like Robert's Rules of Order. So if in the standing rules you put something that sounds like Robert's Rules of Order, it needs a two-thirds, just like Robert's Rules of Order. But if it's something administrative, not Rules of Order, it's a standing rule. It's called ordinary. For instance, where delegates can sit. In many of our clients, people have to wear a certain badge or hat or something silly to prove that they can vote. Well, in those cases, that's administrative. You can suspend it, and all it takes is majority vote. If back at the ASO you have a policy manual on campaigning or a policy manual on anything that is not bylaws or constitution, policy manuals are considered standing rules. And as long as they don't act like Robert's Rules of Order, you only need a majority vote. That's why it is very important not to put everything in your election and nomination document outside of the bylaws. Some of those things should never be suspended. So you need to put those rules in the bylaws. I know it means splitting up one document into two locations, and your English teacher tells you not to do that. You're supposed to put everything together. It belongs together. Well, not in rules. If a rule belongs in a document that cannot be suspended, you put that one rule there. The rest of the rules can be in a document that can be suspended. So you'll end up having two sections: election rules in the bylaws and election rules in your election policy. Same thing for nomination. Same thing for campaigning, for whatever. But you have to determine, you have to decide. You have to be very afraid. If I put it in a particular document, it can be suspended. Do I want it to be suspended? Is it logical? And if so, you leave it wherever you want to. But if you don't want it suspended, put it in the bylaws. It's harder to put it in the Constitution because most of the colleges that we work with can only be amended by the student body, not by the board.
Lorenzo?
Any comments on this, please?
Yes, I have one.
Yes.
So what if the standing rules, say for General Assembly, say there will be no amendments on the floor? Is that procedural or ordinary?
It is procedural because amending is Robert's Rules of Order. If it had said you must wear a hat in order to amend, the wearing a hat would be non-Robert's rules, and that would be ordinary. So if you want to amend, it's going to take you two-thirds vote if you want to amend the standing rule in the SSCCC GA standing rules. But you have to know, what rule am I trying to suspend? If it's Brown Act constitutional bylaws, you know you have no power. Forget it. Don't embarrass yourself by saying so, and a lot of people do. If it's Robert's rules, well, yes, you can, 2/3. If it's convention rule, got to remember, does it look and smell like Robert's rules? Is it talking about Robert's rules? Then in that case, 2/3. If it's something administrative, something silly, something just physical, majority. But be prepared for people not to know any better and say all of them take 2/3 vote, and that is not so. Very good. Now let me go to 2. Undo. These are zombie motions. Zombie. This has happened several times when Tammy and I have been working with the GA as parliamentarians. There was one time, and it caused a lot of problems. We heard about it for months, and this was during one of the conventions. It was a 3-day convention. On the first day, a motion was adopted, but there were people who hated it. They just hated it, and they couldn't stand it. There were people crying because they hated it. So what they did was they moved to reconsider and left it at that. Then, towards the end of the convention, when most of the people had left, but we still had a quorum, but most of the people had left, especially the ones that loved that motion that was adopted, the motion was reconsidered. And now the result of that adopted motion was reversed. It was legally reversed by the assembly, by the GA, because they had a quorum and they took advantage of Robert's Rules of Order. When you go to a meeting, you have to stay there for the entire meeting, because if you adopt something at the beginning, it can be undone before the meeting is over. Oh, pardon me, I thought I turned off the microphone. So this motion, reconsider the vote, has 2 parts. It is complex because people don't want to read this long, long chapter on reconsider the vote. So let's look at it. First of all, you cannot, it's like a regular motion, you cannot interrupt. So you make the motion, it has to be seconded, it can be debated. There is no amending to making the motion to reconsider the vote. And then a majority vote is needed. But remember, there's 2 parts. There are 2 votes. When I said need, only refers to the actual reconsider the vote. The second part is not reconsider the vote, because if you vote yes to reconsider the vote and you adopt it, we leave the reconsider the vote process, and now we go back to the original main motion and pretend nothing happened. We start from scratch. We start from zero. Everyone can amend. Everyone can debate. Everyone can refer, postpone, lay. You can do anything you want to. But the first part was, let us decide, shall we revisit this motion? That's a separate part. We take care of that decision. If the answer is yes, we drop reconsider the vote. Don't think about it. Don't bring it up. Don't think, nothing. Drop it. And now you go back to the original main motion as if nothing had happened. And you start all over. See the 2 processes. So let's walk through that. Reconsider the vote. It is a motion to revisit a motion that was already voted upon, either for or against, adopted or defeated. Doesn't make any difference. A decision was made. It should have been final because it was legally made. But someone says, I move to reconsider the vote we took today on the dinner. Let's say it was a dinner motion. Here are the parts you need to make sure that your delegate understands. The delegate has to proclaim that he voted on the prevailing side, as it's called, the prevailing side. The prevailing side is the side that had the winning side. So if a motion was for the dinner and the motion is defeated, the prevailing side is whoever voted to defeat it. But if the dinner motion was adopted, then the prevailing side was whoever voted for the adoption. So see, prevailing doesn't mean who voted for it in favor. It says who voted and was on the side that won. The idea is we don't want people who are constantly losing to constantly complain and keep bringing it back. The only ones that can bring the motion back are those that voted in favor of the prevailing side. So in this case, the motion for a dinner event was defeated. And let's say I was making the motion, but I voted against it. I voted on the prevailing side. So I have the power, the authority, to move to reconsider. And the move to reconsider has to be done on the date, on the very same day that the motion was made, day that the motion was voted on. the day the motion was voted on. This will happen in your ASO, your Senate, all your boards. You have to make sure that you move to reconsider on the day of the vote, and then you can come back at least on the next meeting to complete the other part, which is part 2. So in reality, you move to reconsider, and then you call it up. You call it up to vote on it some other time. Okay. If the motion is adopted, the original motion is brought back. It can be debated again. It could be amended, referred, postponed, etc. And then we again take a second and final vote. You can only reconsider a motion once, by the way. So the motion was finalized. Someone said, I move to reconsider the vote we took today, and I voted on the prevailing side. And if the motion to reconsider is adopted, we drop everything and start all over with the original main motion. And then there's a second part. This can turn everything around. You have to stick it out because you don't know who's going to try to reconsider something you liked that was adopted. Any comments on this? Let me go to my last one. Move to
5
reconsider.
minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Move to reconsider says, bring it back, let's revisit it. And it has a time element, and you have to be on the prevailing side. It has very definite restrictions. Rescind, on the other hand, has no restrictions. Anybody can say, I move to undo, to reverse, to annul, to kill whatever decision we made. But it has to be a decision on something that was adopted. If you adopted a motion, it is in force. You cannot interrupt, but you can make the motion, I move to rescind the dinner motion. As we seconded, can be debated. Why do we want to rescind it? It can be amended. It's one of those where the vote varies. The vote is not majority or 2/3. It's one or the other. But keep in mind, reconsider says, I voted on the prevailing side. I want to deal with it again. Let's revisit it. Doesn't make a difference whether the motion was adopted or lost. Rescind, on the other hand, is we don't care because it only affects motions that were adopted. So what we're saying is, I want to reverse that adopted decision, that successful decision. Notice it's very different between reconsider the vote. But rescind has no time limit. You can come back 3 minutes, 3 meetings later. You can make the motion anytime, not on the day that it was voted. And we don't care how you voted. Only reconsider requires prevailing side. And so what you would say is, I vote to rescind the motion on the dinner. And here's the difference between majority and 2/3. I gave notice on the call of the meeting. See, when the 72-hour notice goes out, it has to have said a motion to rescind the dinner table will be proposed. That's the notice. But if you didn't give that notice in the call of the meeting, or you could have said it also at the previous meeting, actually, during the meeting itself. Most people do it on the call, the 72-hour adopted agenda that you post. That's where you would add it. If you didn't give a notice, then your motion would be, I move to rescind the motion on the dinner table, on the dinner motion. Oh, that's awkward. I move to rescind the motion on the dinner event. And then you will add, or at least everyone will accuse you, did not give notice in the call of the meeting. Now it takes a 2/3 vote. Notice the difference. If you give notice, you can rescind anything that was adopted with a majority vote. If you didn't give notice and you want to rescind something, it's going to take a 2/3 vote. And that could make a lot of difference. Because if it was evenly or very close to even in the first place, you're not going to be successful unless you give a notice. So, conclusion. Per the SSCCC bylaws, only the delegate may cast a vote during the GA. We know that. We also know the delegate is the official voice of the constituency. That means he better not say, I abstain. Whoever allows a delegate to abstain is neglecting the fact that the bylaws of the SSCCC say you have to enrich and you have to facilitate and you have to do all these different things to the constituency, namely the colleges, and you, the non-delegates. So abstain should not be allowed. Anyone who does that needs to read that section because the bylaws supersede rules, Robert's rules. Okay, now let's go to Brown Act, which surprisingly was not listed as one of the workshops at the SSCCC. It's one of the most important workshops. I couldn't find it. Anyway, per the Brown Act, the constituency is composed of at least all the non-delegates. It could also include any student, any member of the public, whether they live in your region or not. That's a constituency. They all should have a right to email or text the delegate and help the delegate how to vote. The constituency may contact the delegate by whatever means possible. No one can restrict you because you need to have direct communication. And as a non-delegate, it is your obligation to help the delegate. The delegate is accountable to the constituency. You are not there as a subordinate. They are there to serve you, and they are accountable to you. If you're upset, you can do something about it later on because this delegate did not work for the sake of the of the college. Are there any comments, any questions, anything I should have said differently? I congratulate you for participating.